One morning, that is, on the seventh or eighth day after Stepan Trofimovitch had consented to become engaged, at about 11 o'clock, when I was rushing, as usual, to my sorrowful friend, I had an adventure on the way. I met Karmazinov, the great writer, as Laputin styled him. I had been reading Karmazinov since childhood. His novellas and stories were known to the whole of the previous generation, and even to ours. As for me, I reveled in them. They were the delight of my adolescence and youth. Later I grew somewhat cold to his pen. The tendentious novellas he had been writing lately I liked less than his first, original creations, in which there was so much ingenuous poetry. And his most recent works I even did not like at all. Generally speaking, if I dare express my own opinion in such a ticklish matter, all these gentlemen talents of the average sort, who are usually taken almost for geniuses in their lifetime, not only vanish from people's memory almost without a trace and somehow suddenly when they die, but it happens that even in their lifetime, as soon as a new generation grows up to replace the one in whose time they were active, they are forgotten and scorned by everyone inconceivably quickly. This happens somehow suddenly with us, like a change of sets in the theater. Oh, it is quite another matter than with the Pushkins, Gogols, Molières, Voltaires, with all these figures who came to speak their new word. It is also true that these gentlemen talents of the average sort, in the decline of their venerable age, usually write themselves out in a most pathetic way, without even noticing it at all. Not infrequently it turns out that a writer to whom an extreme profundity of ideas had long been attributed, and from whom an extreme and serious influence upon the movement of society was expected, in the end displays such thinness and puniness in his basic little idea that no one is even sorry that he has managed to write himself out so quickly. But the old graybeards do not notice this and get angry. Their vanity, precisely towards the end of their career, sometimes takes on proportions worthy of wonder. God knows who they begin to think they are. Gods, at the least. It was said of Karmazinov that he valued his connections with influential people and with higher society almost more than his soul. It was said that he would meet you, show you kindness, seduce you, charm you with his ingenuousness, especially if he needed you for some reason, and most certainly if you had been recommended to him beforehand. But at the first prince, at the first countess, at the first person he wasn't in fear of, he would regard it as his sacred duty to forget you with the most insulting disdain, like a speck, like a fly, then and there, even before you had time to leave him. He seriously considered it the most lofty and beautiful tone. In spite of his complete self-possession and perfect knowledge of good manners, he was said to be so vain, to the point of such hysterics, that he was simply unable to conceal his authorial petulance, even in those social circles where there was little interest in literature. And if someone chanced to confound him with their indifference, he would be morbidly offended and seek to revenge himself. About a year before, I had read an article of his in a magazine written with a terrible pretension to the most naive poetry and, at the same time, to psychology. He described the wreck of a steamer somewhere on the English coast, of which he himself had been a witness and had seen how the perishing were being saved and the drowned dragged out. The whole article, quite a long and verbose one, was written with the sole purpose of self-display. One could simply read in between the lines, "Pay attention to me. Look at how I was in those moments. What do you need the sea, the storm, the rocks, the splintered planks of the ship for? I've described it all well enough for you with my mighty pen. Why look at this drowned woman? Why look at this drowned woman with her dead baby in her dead arms? Better look at me, and how I could not bear the sight and turned away. Here I am turning my back. Here I am horrified and unable to look again. I've shut my eyes. Interesting, is it not?" I told Stepan Trofimovitch my opinion of Karmazinov's article, and he agreed with me. When rumors began to spread recently that Karmazinov was coming, I, of course, wanted terribly to see him and, if possible, to make his acquaintance. I knew that I could do so through Stepan Trofimovitch. They had been friends once upon a time, and now I suddenly met him at an intersection. I recognized him at once. He had already been pointed out to me 3 days earlier as he rode past in a carriage with the governor's wife. He was quite a short, prim little old man, though no more than 55, with a rather red-cheeked little face, with thick gray locks emerging from under his round, cylindrical hat and curling behind his clean, pink little ears. His clean little face was not exactly handsome, with its thin, long, slyly compressed lips, its somewhat fleshy nose, and its sharp, intelligent little eyes. He was dressed somehow shabbily, with a sort of cloak thrown over his shoulders, such as would have been worn at that season somewhere in Switzerland, say, or the north of Italy. But at least all the minor accessories of his costume, the little cufflinks, collar, studs, the tortoiseshell lorgnette on its narrow black ribbon, the little signet ring, were most assuredly just as they are with people of irreproachably good tone. I'm sure that in summer he certainly went around in bright prunella bootykins with mother-of-pearl buttons at the side. When we ran into each other, he had stopped for a moment at the street corner and was looking around with attention. Noticing that I was looking at him curiously, he asked me in a honeyed, though somewhat shrill, little voice, "Would you be so good as to tell me the shortest way to Bykov Street?" "Bykov Street? But it's here, right here," I cried out in unusual excitement. "Keep straight on this way, then second turn to the left. I am much obliged to you." Cursed be that moment. I seemed to have grown timid and looked fawning. He instantly noticed everything and, of course, understood everything at once. That is, understood that I already knew who he was, that I had read him and revered him since childhood, and that I had just grown timid and looked fawning. He smiled, nodded his head once more, and went straight on as I had directed him. I do not know why I turned to follow him. I do not know why I went running alongside him for about 10 paces. He suddenly stopped again. "And might you be able to tell me where the nearest cab stand is located?" he shouted to me again. A nasty shout, a nasty voice. "Cab stand? The nearest cab stand is by the cathedral. That's where they always stand." And I almost turned and ran to fetch a cab. I suspect that was precisely what he expected of me. Of course, I came to my senses at once and stopped, but he had made good note of my movement and went on watching me with the same nasty smile. What happened then, I shall never forget. He suddenly dropped a tiny satchel that he was holding in his left hand. It was not a satchel, by the way, but a sort of little box, or rather a sort of briefcase, or better still, a little reticule, such as ladies once used to carry. But I do not know what it was. I only know that it seems I rushed to pick it up. I am perfectly convinced that I did not pick it up, but my initial movement was unquestionable. It was too late to conceal it, and I blushed like a fool. The cunning fellow at once derived all that could be derived from the circumstance. "Don't trouble, I'll do it myself," he said charmingly. That is, once he had fully noted that I was not going to pick up his reticule. Picked it up as if forestalling me, nodded his head once more, and went on his way, having made a fool of me. It was the same as if I had picked it up myself. For about 5 minutes I considered myself disgraced, utterly and forever. But coming up to Stepan Trofimovitch's house, I suddenly burst out laughing. The encounter seemed so funny to me that I immediately decided to amuse Stepan Trofimovitch by telling him about it and even acting out the whole scene.